Joining me live now is Liberal Senator and former Ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma. Senator Sharma, thank you for your time. Do you welcome the fact that the Prime Minister in the Lowy lecture last night reiterated his view that Hamas can play no future role in the governance of Gaza, essentially that it's got to be destroyed by Israel?
Well, I do welcome that statement, Kieran, but unfortunately it was muddied or overturned by a number of things he's said and done subsequently in the weeks preceding. I mean, I agree with Anthony Albanese that if you want an enduring peace in the Middle East, if you want a better future for the Palestinian people, if you ultimately want a two-state solution, Hamas cannot be left in power. But at the same time, if that's the case, how can Australia be voting for a one-sided unilateral ceasefire resolution in the General Assembly, which would do exactly that, which would leave Hamas in power, free to mount more terrorist attacks against Israel, free to execute and behead and sexually assault more Israeli civilians, but also free to keep the Palestinian people's hopes and dreams captive to their own, nihilistic visions?
So he's saying international efforts towards a sustainable ceasefire, that he's supporting that. You're saying it's mutually exclusive, that you can't argue that on the one hand and say there's no future for Hamas on the other.
That's right. He's being entirely inconsistent here. We voted for a resolution in the General Assembly just last week. Australia did. The US voted against it. Britain abstained on it. Germany abstained on it, but we voted for it. And that resolution calls for an immediate ceasefire, which would leave Hamas in place, which would stop Israeli military operations to destroy tunnels and stop Israeli military operations to capture Hamas's senior leadership. And the end result will that will be Hamas remains in political power in Gaza. Now, at the same time, we've got the Prime Minister saying again and again, as he did last night, that Hamas can play no future role in Gaza. Well, which one is it? Make up your mind, stick to a position and then prosecute it clearly. But this government is speaking out of both sides of their mouth on this issue. They cannot make up their mind.
Is it true that some Israelis are also calling for a ceasefire? And in that context, I'm thinking of those with relatives who remain captive, hostage to Hamas.
Well, certainly Israelis are calling for the unconditional release of all their hostages. There's about 130 that remain under the control of Hamas. And, the Israel government and the Israeli civilians and public are calling for further attempts to negotiate through Qatar and other mediators the further exchange of hostages. Now, there were meetings held just over the last few days involving the head of the CIA, the head of the Mossad, Qatari authorities and others to discuss the way forward. Certainly, I think everyone would like to see the hostages released safe and unharmed. But that is a separate conversation, if you like, to what is the political future of Gaza going to look like. And those two conversations need to be happening at the same time. And I don't think anyone in Israel would support all the hostages being released if that meant that Hamas remained in political power in Gaza. Both of those objectives need to be addressed, or both of those conditions need to be addressed.
Is it not achievable? And again, I'm asking you a question where you're in Sydney and I'm in Canberra. It's the most diabolical international dilemma right now. So an answer to it is obviously very difficult, but I'm asking because this whole debate is so complex. If you've got the PM saying he wants a ceasefire along with most of the members of the UN, aren't they then saying that, the corollary to that is to say that Israel can still dismantle Hamas, but by other means, but not by this total onslaught of Gaza?
Well, I'd just say that Israel has attempted now since Hamas took over in Gaza to keep them limited as a military actor. It's restricted the sort of material that can go into Gaza, but Hamas found other way to build weapons. It's put economic pressure on Gaza, but Hamas has found other ways to make money and bring money on the inside. So the containment and deterrence of Hamas has manifestly failed, as the October 7th terrorist attacks indicate. This is a group that is only committed to the destruction of the State of Israel and the slaughter of as many Jews as it can get its hands on. This is its sole purpose and reason for being. Now, in that situation, if Israeli attempts to contain and deter it in the past have failed, and Egypt has cooperated with those attempts by closing its own border crossing through Rafah, then the only option is to remove Hamas from political power. And I think most of the world, and indeed most of the Arab world, even though they're not going to come out and say this publicly, would like to see Hamas gone from the scene, because they know that Hamas, throughout its history, has held back the cause of peace in the Middle East and has held back the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Now, diplomacy has failed to dislodge Hamas. That's why we're left with force.